In this class and the coming one, we will be studying the development of the gastrointestinal tract and the glands associated with this system, that's liver, pancreas, and though it is not related to this function of GIT, spleen also shall be described. Since this is GIT, we shall not be talking about the fate of the embryological structures which lie above the diaphragm. So, our main objective is to study the development and its congenital anomalies which are associated with it, and of those parts which lie below the diaphragm, also called subdiaphragmatic part of the gastrointestinal tract. That means much of the esophagus or the pharynx and the structures associated with it shall not be discussed in this class. Let's take some time to watch this animation. Of course, I have taken it from YouTube, which will summarize right from the beginning, that is formation of the germ disc, rather week 2. It's also known as the week of twos. 2 germ layers, 2 cavities, and their subsequent fate. And here also we can see how the primitive gut is formed and the subsequent changes which take place in this primitive gut, which is derived from endoderm. There are 2 points we should remember: that the gut, the primitive gut, when it is formed, it's a continuous tube. As usual, we have discussed the importance of recanalization in the cardiovascular system. Here also the mechanism is same, the plan is same. It will be in the midline and it is anchored to the anterior abdominal wall and posterior abdominal wall by sheets of mesoderm called mesenteries. So these are called ventral mesentery and dorsal mesentery, which will be holding or suspending the gut in the midline. And these mesenteries are double layered. Since we have 2 sides, so they will be double layered unless we fold them to make into 4 or more. See this animation, take some time to appreciate, and the lecturer's voice, if you want you can reduce the volume, and mainly you should know how the embryo folds, how the amniotic cavity increases considerably compared to the yolk sac, and how the yolk sac will be constricted from a large cavity to a smaller and the smallest when it is called vitellointestinal duct. Subsequent to the folding of the embryo, the endoderm, which was like a sheet hitherto, now it folds and forms a tubular structure called primitive gut. This primitive gut, this tube is not intact throughout, because at one point it will be communicating with the regressing yolk sac. So at one point close to the umbilicus or the attachment of the umbilical cord, the gut maintains its connection for some time with the yolk sac. This part of the primitive gut is called midgut, and the part of the primitive gut cranial to this communication is called foregut, and caudal to the communication with the yolk sac is called hindgut. This hindgut will be closed for some time by a membrane called cloacal membrane. As we have studied, the cranial end of the tube is called the primitive mouth, which is closed by a membrane called buccopharyngeal membrane. So, buccopharyngeal membrane on one side, the cloacal membrane on the other. These membranes do break down, and as the entire embryo is surrounded by the amniotic cavity, the amniotic fluid starts to circulate in the primitive gut, which is highly essential also, which will indicate the developing status of the gut and the respiratory tract in the embryo. So we can monitor this circulation and what will happen if the circulation is impeded by some causes that you might have studied in general embryology, or if there is a possibility, I shall mention it to you. So, primitive gut is formed from endoderm because of folding of the embryo, and this primitive gut communicates with the yolk sac at the umbilical cord level, and this will be taken as a reference point to divide arbitrarily. You must remember it's a continuous tube. So cranial to the communication is called the foregut, and caudal to the communication shall be known as hindgut. The entire gut is plugged by two membranes, one at the future mouth and one at the future anus, and these membranes have to break down to allow the amniotic fluid to circulate within the gut for their proper development. In this slide, a longitudinal section of the developing embryo, it is shown how the umbilical cord is attached to the ventral aspect of the body and how the primitive gut is placed and how is it communicating with the vitelline duct, that is the final stages of the regressing yolk sac, and all the big blood vessels like aorta, if you remember, they will be running in the back of the embryo, back of the body. Please remember the descending thoracic aorta or abdominal aorta, they are all in the posterior abdominal wall and posterior part of the mediastinum. So the big vessels, whether it's veins or the arteries, shall be close to the vertebral column. So here in this picture below, he is showing a big artery, that is the dorsal aorta, and it is a rule that the primitive gut has to be supplied by direct branches coming from the aorta. So the foregut is nourished by celiac trunk. The midgut part or portion is supplied by superior mesenteric artery, and the hindgut will be supplied by the inferior mesenteric artery. Foregut means all those structures which are derived from the foregut shall be supplied by branches of the celiac trunk. So, if we know the arterial supply, we can always guess, not necessarily guess, we can always say with authority that this particular structure has been derived from foregut or midgut or hindgut. That we shall see soon. Next, we will come to the extent of the foregut. How far does it extend? Where does the midgut begin? Where does the hindgut begin? So, the foregut ends at the level of the major duodenal papilla. In the second part of duodenum, you might have studied the duodenal anatomy. Where the bile duct opens, there is a swelling. That's called the major duodenal papilla, where a combined hepatopancreatic duct shall open. That is our landmark to say that up to here is the foregut. So beyond this shall be the midgut. That means those structures which are at the junction shall be having both the arteries supplying them. So that's called the dual arterial supply. In the same way, where the midgut becomes hindgut, there also at the junction, the parts will be supplied by both the arteries, that is superior mesenteric and inferior mesenteric. We shall also see that. So where foregut ends, the midgut begins, and the midgut extends from the major duodenal papilla up to the junction between right 2/3 and left 1/3 of the transverse colon. These are the things which they will ask you in the viva voce or oral exam, so be prepared for that. So from the left 1/3 of the transverse colon, then we have the descending colon, then sigmoid colon, and rectum, and the anal canal up to the pectinate line. They are all derived from hindgut, so they get their blood supply or arterial supply from the inferior mesenteric artery. You have studied the anal canal, I suppose, a very important structure indeed because of its various features. So, the anal columns, the lower ends are joined by a tooth-like wavy line or mucosal folds. That's called pectinate line. Pectinate means the teeth of a comb. So this is the extent of the various parts of the primitive gut called foregut, midgut and hindgut, their arterial supply and how far they extend. As I have mentioned, the primitive gut is attached to the anterior abdominal wall by a ventral mesentery and to the posterior abdominal wall by a dorsal mesentery. The dorsal mesentery is continuous right from the diaphragm down to the anal canal. There is no interruption. But coming to the ventral mesentery, there is an interruption because of the attachment of the umbilical cord. So, we will see that from the diaphragm to the beginning of the umbilical cord's attachment, it is discontinuous rather. It extends only up to that place. These mesenteries change their names as well depending on the viscus or the organ to which they are attached. For example, the part of the mesentery that is attaching the stomach to other structures is called mesogastrium. As you know, gaster means belly, and mesogastrium is the peritoneal fold that is attaching the stomach to the neighboring structures. So the one that is attaching the stomach to the anterior abdominal wall, the so-called ventral mesentery, here we call it ventral mesogastrium because it is attached to the stomach or attaching the stomach to the neighboring structures. Similarly, on the back, the dorsal mesentery part will be called dorsal mesogastrium. So when we say dorsal mesogastrium, we know that we are talking about the attachments to the stomach only and nothing else. Similarly, the next part to follow is the duodenum. It also has a mesentery, at least in the beginning of the developing gut, and that's called mesoduodenum. Next is the hindgut. Will be having the mesocolon. So those portions which are attaching the hindgut to the neighboring structures is called mesocolon. So mesogastrium, mesoduodenum, mesocolon, all put together, it becomes a mesentery. Now we'll start our story with the abdominal part of the esophagus. As you know, the esophagus, the so-called gullet or the food passage, begins in the neck at the level of cricoid cartilage along with trachea. Pharynx continues as esophagus. The larynx continues as trachea. The esophagus is described as cervical part, thoracic part before it enters by passing through the diaphragm, and that's called the abdominal esophagus. So the esophagus, also pronounced esophagus by the Americans, is the cranial part of the cephalic part or cranial part of the foregut, and this esophagus, which belongs to the gut, that itself will give rise to the respiratory system. That is very interesting, and you must remember, gut comes first and the respiration comes later. A part of the anterior wall of the esophagus is separated as the lung bud, and eventually it gets separated from the esophagus, and that's how you will see the trachea is in front and the esophagus behind it, and very close to each other if you have studied the head and neck. If you haven't, then we will tell you once again. And in case this separation of the trachea is incomplete from the esophagus, quite naturally the baby is born with an abnormal communication between the food passage and the respiratory passage, a very dangerous condition indeed, and this is called tracheoesophageal fistula. A fistula means an abnormal communication between two structures, two or more structures, and the point to remember here is that the trachea is separated from esophagus. That is interesting. After the esophagus, we'll come to the stomach. So the stomach starts to dilate, starts to swell, and it becomes fusiform, and it is attached to the anterior and posterior abdominal walls by ventral and dorsal mesogastria. There will be further changes in the mesogastrium. We will come back to that later. At this juncture, the aorta will give off celiac trunk that will be supplying the stomach. You know the arterial supply of the stomach. So left gastric, then the right gastric, and all these are branches. The splenic artery also will supply the stomach, the vasa brevia to the fundus, short gastric arteries. So once we know the arterial supply, then we can confidently say that this structure is derived from foregut. Further development of the stomach, the back portion or the dorsal wall grows much faster than the ventral, and not only that, as a regular feature in the GIT, in all these tubes undergo a rotation. If you keep your left palm with the thumb extended in the midline, and the thumb represents the esophagus, and the radial border towards the index finger, this curvature is the anterior border, and the opposite part, the counterpart, which is on the ulnar border of the palm, that will be called the posterior border, and the palm is the surface, the right surface, and the dorsum of your hand is the left surface, right? So that is the situation before the stomach rotates. It's in the midline, having two surfaces and two borders. Now slowly turn your hand in such a way that the dorsum faces to the front and the palm facing towards your body. Now what happened? The original right surface of the stomach has gone back. It has become posterior surface. The original left surface has become anterior surface. This is called the rotation of the stomach. By this rotation, there are two vagi, right and left vagi, which will be supplying the stomach on their surfaces. Right vagus supplies the right surface, the left vagus supplies the left. With the rotation, the left surface has become anterior, so the left vagus will become anterior and the right vagus goes posterior. This shifting of the position of the vagi is an indication that the stomach indeed has rotated. And the original posterior border will now be called greater curvature. The original anterior border, that is from the thumb, extended thumb to the index finger, will become what's called the lesser curvature. So attaching to the lesser curvature to the anterior abdominal wall will be the ventral mesogastrium, which will later on will be divided into two. We will see that. And the dorsal mesogastrium is attached to the greater curvature, and which we have seen as the great omentum propter. Before the stomach has rotated, it is in the midline, and the abdominal cavity, we can say that it is having a right half and a left half. But with the rotation and continuous growth on the back of the stomach, a part of the abdominal cavity goes behind the stomach, and this small part, which indeed has come from the main peritoneal cavity, will be known as lesser sac, or also known as omental bursa. So omental bursa or lesser sac is formed because of the rotation. So a part of the general cavity or coelom will go behind the stomach, and because of the great stretching of the dorsal mesogastrium, there is a space that is formed, which will be acting somewhat as a sort of a shock absorber, or it is protecting, or it provides a sort of a dead space for the stomach to expand when we eat much, and it is also coming in the way between the posterior wall of the stomach and the structures deep to it, especially the pancreas. So that's about the development of the stomach, initially in the midline, then the posterior wall will grow considerably, thereby stretching the dorsal mesogastrium which is attached to it, and how the borders and surfaces change their positions, and how it reflected on the shifting of the vagi, which is a conclusive proof that the stomach has rotated. And now it's time to study some of the congenital anomalies. There is a condition called congenital hypertrophic pyloric stenosis, where the pyloric sphincter, there is a heaping of smooth muscle to form a sphincter, but an excess production of this sphincteric muscle will completely stenose this passage, so the food encounters severe problems to pass into the duodenum, so it will regurgitate, and resulting in a characteristic very violent vomiting in the newborn. This particular vomiting is described as projectile vomiting, one of the diagnostic signs of the congenital hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. People also think that this runs in families as well. Related to the esophagus, because it's a tube, we have discussed something about stenosis and atresia in the cardiovascular system. The principle is same, whether it is in GIT or in angiology. Any tube can be stenosed or it can be completely blocked, called atresia. So if the esophagus is completely blocked, quite naturally it will be impossible to nourish the baby without surgical intervention. In the next slide, we will show you a small animation how the recanalization takes place. Now we will move on to the midgut part of the gastrointestinal tract. Midgut, we have already defined its extension, that is from the major duodenal papilla to the junction between the right 2/3 and left 1/3 of transverse column. And it is supplied by the superior mesenteric artery. the parts which are derived, obviously starting with the second part of the duodenum, the rest of duodenum, jejunum, ileum, cecum, ascending colon, then transverse colons, right 2/3. All these structures shall be supplied by the superior mesenteric artery, which you can verify in your gross anatomy. The coils of jejunum and ileum are quite long compared to duodenum or even the colon, and they start to form number of loops in the abdomen, and there is not much of a place for these increasing number of coils of jejunum and ileum. Here is a scan photograph of the developing embryo, where he is showing the gut, the midgut coming out of the abdomen, though umbilical cord is removed, but it is called the physiological herniation. This is an abnormal protrusion, but it is essential, so it is called physiological herniation. It should not happen in the adult life, but in the embryo it's all right, it has to. And the post-arterial segment is characterized by a bulky diverticulum or swelling, which is going to become the cecum, so it is called cecal butt. The next stage of development, as in the case of hernia, you have studied the inguinal hernia. Any repair is called the reduction. Reduction means a repair, to send it back into the abdomen, and in the developing midgut as well, it will be called the second stage of rotation. During all these movements, it is continuously rotating, and this is the return of the midgut coils. There is a doubt, somebody asked how the gut will come back into the abdomen. It is proved that you have studied the histology, I suppose, the cardinal structures in the wall of the gut, that is mucosa, submucosa, muscularis externa and serosa. And it seems the muscularis layer in the prearterial segment is formed or differentiated first ahead of the postarterial segment, and it starts to contract, thereby facilitating the reduction of the prearterial segment first into the abdomen, followed by the postarterial segment. And please remember, it is the cecum, because of its bulk, because it's heavier, it is the last part to come back into the abdomen from the umbilical coelom. So as soon as it is back into the abdomen, it will encounter the liver, which is much of it is on the right side, and from there it will gradually descend into the right iliac fossa, thereby forming the ascending colon. Got the point? The cecum was somewhere below the liver, and then it gradually comes down to the right iliac fossa, which is its usual permanent residence, and thereby it forms the ascending colon. So ascending colon is formed by the descent of cecum from its subhepatic position. Sometimes it may not descend. In that case, the cecum will be very closely related to the visceral surface of the liver. That is called subhepatic cecum. So as the coils come back into the abdomen, they will be pushing the mesogastrium to one side or the mesentery onto the flanks, so exerting great pressure on them. That is why the descending colon will lose its mesentery, dorsal mesentery, and it becomes retroperitoneal. I think you have studied about what is intraperitoneal and what is retroperitoneal. Intraperitoneal means any organ which is completely invested by the peritoneum on all sides. It's called intraperitoneal, not within the peritoneal cavity. No. If it is completely covered with the peritoneum on all sides, it is called an intraperitoneal organ, like stomach, for example. And those structures or those organs which are covered only on their fronts by the peritoneum, their backs are devoid of peritoneum, such structures are called retroperitoneal. Ascending colon, because the cecum is descending along the flank, so this pressure will result in the loss of the dorsal mesentery. So ascending colon will become retroperitoneal. Descending colon also becomes retroperitoneal because of the pressure exerted by the returning coils of jejunum and ileum. All of them will go to the left because the right is monopolized by the liver. There is no place, so they gradually push the hindgut to the left flank, so they will become retroperitoneal. In this animation, you can see the midgut loop showing the pre and post arterial segments and how the prearterial segment is thrown into number of folds, which will later become the coils of jejunum and ileum, and the bulkier large intestinal part, that is cecal bud. It is also showing some signs of the projection which forms the vermiform appendix, and how it crosses in front of the prearterial segment, something like a picture frame, and indeed within the center of this frame is the prearterial segment, and gradually the prearterial segment will go back first, followed by the bulkier post-arterial segment. The last stage, once they come back into the abdomen, that is, then they will attain their permanent positions which are seen in the adults, with the variations kept aside. And this third stage is called fixation. They are fixed to their permanent post or positions. As I told you, the cecum is the last part to come back, and then from there it has to descend into the right iliac fossa, thereby forming the ascending colon. So from subhepatic position to the right iliac fossa, descending colon, and descending colon has not come into the abdomen, into the umbilical cord. Please remember, we are talking only about the midgut. So as the coils return, they will push the colon which is in the midline to the left side, and they also become retroperitoneal, and also the duodenum will be crossed by the coils of jejunum. This picture is showing the adult setup after the completion of the rotation of the midgut. As I told you, the colon or the hindgut is pushed to the left flank, and together with the post-arterial segment of midgut and the remaining hindgut, they form something like a picture frame, and within the frame we will find the number of coils of jejunum and ileum which belong or which have been derived from the prearterial segment of the midgut. And The further development of the liver and other structures we shall see soon. The congenital anomalies of the midgut shall follow a general logic because of the various rotations and shifting of the positions of the midgut. Anywhere, anytime, failures can happen. Like, for example, after it has herniated into the umbilical coelom and then failed to return, then it will stay in the umbilical cord and the baby is born with a large coils of jejunum and ileum projecting at the umbilicus. So this is called omphalocele or ex omphalos. X is outside, exit is out. Or sometimes there is a non-rotation, so we will find the various positions of the colon and the coils of jejunum and ileum, and sometimes there is a twisting of the coils and which is called volvulus, and subhepatic cecum we have already discussed, and the recanalization problems which are quite common in the gastrointestinal tract, most probably because of the length of the gut tube. So duodenal atresia is one of the conditions, and the Meckel's diverticulum is an interesting structure. We have seen that the yolk sac will be reducing in size. Finally it becomes a tube called vitellointestinal duct, and then it is pinched off. It forms a sort of a jelly in the umbilical cord. Sometimes it won't be pinched off, or it won't be cut off, or it will still maintain its communication with the midgut as we have seen in the early embryonic time. Meckel's diverticulum, of course, with all respects to Mr. Meckel or Dr. Meckel, it doesn't give us much idea. These eponyms have to be avoided at any cost. Somebody's artery, somebody's vein, somebody's nerve. We don't know where they are. Eustachian tube. Where is Eustachian tube? What does it connect? We don't know. That's only because we know by the name of the fella who has described them. Fallopian tube. It should have been uterine tube. And well, incidentally, Meckel's diverticulum is a favorite short note question in embryology, so you be prepared for that. In the next slide, we will be describing that. Perhaps the better name is diverticulum ilii, so at least we know that there will be a swelling or a diverticulum attached or related to the ileum. Not Meckel's diverticulum, we don't know. And it's of mnemonic value. The people go gaga about the magic number of 2. In reality, it is not so, but still, at your level, it's all right. The rule of 2, it's located 2 feet from the end of small intestine. It's often about 2 inches in length. It occurs about 2% in population, 2% of the population, and is twice as common in males as females. And because it is connected to the gut tube, it can contain any of the tissues which are called ectopic tissues. They are not in their expected place. So any gastric tissue can be found or pancreatic tissue can be found within the Meckel's diverticulum or diverticulum ileae. You will have to write all these points, or it's better to tell them about yolk sac and its changes before you jump to the rule of twos. In this animation, it is shown how a recanalization takes place, how a solid tube, by this process of drilling or burrowing into the future lumen, and if there is a failure, what shall happen to the gut tube. We will come to the hindgut now. The extent, as we have mentioned already, from the left 1/3 of the transverse colon. So that means a part of the transverse colon is of dual origin. So it will be supplied by both superior and inferior mesenteric arteries. And the descending colon, sigmoid colon, and rectum and anal canal up to the pectinate line. If you are in doubt that what is the lower part of the anal canal develops from, so it develops from surface ectoderm, it's called proctodeum. So anal canal, that's why I told you that it's anatomically quite significant indeed, and it is also of dual origin. Above the pectinate line it is derived from endoderm, but below it, it is derived from surface ectoderm, so it is pain sensitive and others. And there is a diverticulum which is given off by the yolk sac before the folding takes place, and this is called allantois. Allantois was a functioning urinary bladder in lower animals like birds, but in the human beings also it will appear like that. What is called a ontogeny repeats phylogeny. Though it doesn't form the urinary bladder per se, nonetheless it will appear in the embryo. We take the communication with the allantois and divide the hindgut into two parts. One cranial to the communication is the hindgut proper, and caudal to the communication, it's called cloaca. It's a common receptacle for both the discharges from the kidneys, that's urine, and also the intestinal contents. So the lowermost part of the hindgut is common for two systems, that is urinary system and the intestinal contents, and so it is called cloaca, and that's why the membrane that covers this part is called cloacal membrane. Later this cloaca is split into two, separating the two systems. The anterior part becomes the urogenital sinus and the posterior part will become anorectum. This appearance of cloaca is also an indication that the evolutionary scale, the lower animals have evolved first and we came later. This is to show the hindgut, or especially the anal canal up to the pectinate line, how it belongs to the hindgut proper. That is, it is derived from endoderm, and below the pectinate line it is coming from the surface ectoderm called proctodeum, and that's why it is described as the anal canal is of dual origin, and how it is pain sensitive below the pectinate line and above it is not pain sensitive or pain insensitive, and the other surgical implications so far. Some of the congenital anomalies involving the hindgut are the Hirschsprung's disease. The colon is extremely large because of the non-development of the ganglia, and in certain cases the anus fails to open outside, and when it is called imperforate anus. And since cloaca is dealing with two different systems altogether, one is urine and other is the intestinal contents, let us say stools or meconium as it is called in the embryo or in the fetus. If the cloaca is not separated properly, so there will be an abnormal communication between the hindgut or rectum and the urinary bladder. It's called rectovesical fistula. And in case of female, since the uterus interposes between the wind and water, and there will be an abnormal communication as well, it is called the rectovaginal fistula and so on. So these abnormal communications are possible because initially the structure is dealing with two different systems and it is failed to get separated, thereby resulting in these congenital anomalies. In these slides, there are pictures which show the so-called the congenital anomalies which we have discussed so far: Hirschsprung's disease, and then imperforate anus, and also abnormal fistulae. These are they require a surgical intervention, and it's not a life-threatening condition really, unless it takes a long time in cases of fistulae, because the hindgut and the urinary bladder, if they communicate with each other, both are dealing with somewhat toxic materials, and indeed it will take quite a long time to heal. Thank you very much.